3 true horror stories of faces that didn't belong. There's a special kind of dread that doesn't come from some monster hiding in your closet. It comes from the person standing right in front of you. It's that chilling, sinking feeling when you realize the face you're looking at, a face you know, is just wrong. It might be a tiny shift, a flicker in their eyes, or a voice that's almost right, but isn't. Tonight, we have 3 stories sent in by viewers who came face to face with that unsettling reality, who learned that some things are experts at pretending to be human. Story 1. The unwanted guest. It always starts with small things, doesn't it? Little details you can easily brush off. Things that make you question your own mind before you question reality. For Mark, Sarah, and their 7-year-old Lily, it started the day they got home from a week-long vacation. The house just felt off. It wasn't something you could point to, but the air was stale in a way that wasn't theirs. Mark noticed it first. The thermostat was set to 68 degrees. He was meticulous. He always kept it at 72. He figured it was just a power flicker. Then Sarah went to make coffee and found a different brand in their canister. A cheap, bitter-smelling ground she'd never buy. "Did you grab this by mistake?" she asked. Mark just shook his head, a knot of confusion tightening in his gut. Over the next few weeks, the inconsistencies got worse. A book from the shelf would appear on the coffee table. The shower curtain, which they always left open, would be pulled shut. Lily started complaining that someone was moving her toys at night, lining her dolls up in a perfectly neat row on her dresser. They'd find windows cracked open that they swore they'd locked. And each time, they found a way to explain it away. They were tired, forgetful, stressed. They were gaslighting themselves because the other option was just too terrifying to think about. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Mark was working late, and Sarah was putting Lily to bed. As she tucked her in, Lily whispered, "Mommy, can the nice lady read me a story tonight?" Sarah froze. "What nice lady, honey?" Lily pointed a small finger toward the hallway. "The one who makes me oatmeal in the morning." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She hadn't made oatmeal all week. Heart hammering, she crept out of the room. The house was silent, but it was a heavy silence, thick with a presence. She stepped into the living room and saw her. A woman about her own age was sitting calmly on their sofa, reading one of their books. She was wearing Sarah's pajamas. The woman looked up, and her face broke into a gentle, untroubled smile. It was a face that simply didn't belong, a complete stranger in the heart of their home. "Oh, hello," the woman said, her voice soft and casual, like Sarah was the one interrupting. "You're home early." Sarah could only stammer, Who are you?" "Get out of my house." The woman's smile never wavered. She just tilted her head. "Your house?" "Oh, sweetie, I think you're confused. This is my house." She gestured around the room, at their family pictures, their life. "I've lived here for years." The calm certainty in her eyes was the most terrifying thing Sarah had ever seen. There was no anger, no obvious delusion, just a placid, unshakable belief that she belonged there, and Sarah was the intruder. Mark came home to find his wife and daughter huddled in the car, and a stranger inside who looked at him with serene ownership, asking him why he was letting a draft in. The police were called, but the woman's serene gaslighting was so absolute that for one horrifying moment, even the officers seemed unsure. She was eventually removed, but the family could never again shake that feeling of violation, the knowledge that for weeks, a stranger had walked their halls, used their things, and calmly tried to erase them from their own lives. Story 2. The Voice from the Woods. This next story comes from a viewer named Ethan, who grew up spending summers at his grandparents' cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The woods there are ancient, and they carry stories the locals only tell after the sun goes down. One of those stories was about things that can mimic you, things that can learn your voice, learn your name, and call you into the dark trees where you'll never be seen again. Ethan, being a teenager, blew it off as campfire stories meant to keep kids from wandering too far. He and his younger sister Chloe spent their days exploring, pushing the boundaries their grandparents had set. The one absolute rule was to be home before dusk. No exceptions. One afternoon, they were playing by a creek, maybe a mile from the cabin. The sun was getting low, painting long, eerie shadows through the trees. Ethan knew they needed to go. "Come on, Chloe," he said. "It's getting late." Chloe was busy skipping stones and didn't answer. He called her name again, a bit louder this time. That's when he heard it. From deep in the woods, on the far side of the creek, his own voice called out, "Chloe." It was a perfect copy. His tone, his pitch, everything. He froze, the hair on his arms standing straight up. Chloe heard it too. She stared, her eyes wide with confusion, looking from Ethan to the woods and back again. Then another voice drifted out of those same dark trees, their grandmother's. "Ethan, Chloe, supper's ready. Come on home now." But this one was wrong. It was strained, too high-pitched, with a strange echo that felt unnatural in the open air. Ethan knew his grandmother was back at the cabin. Her bad hip meant she could never walk this far. He grabbed Chloe's hand, his heart slamming against his ribs. "Don't listen," he whispered, his own voice shaking. "That's not them." As they scrambled back the way they came, the voices followed. They heard their grandfather calling for them to come see a deer he'd supposedly found. They heard their own mother, who was hundreds of miles away in the city, her voice laced with a desperate sweetness. It was a chorus of everyone they trusted in the world, all calling from that same spot in the darkening woods. It was a predator, an ancient and intelligent one that uses love as its lure. In some legends, a creature like this is called a Wendigo or a skinwalker, a being that can flawlessly mimic human voices to draw its victims in. They didn't stop running until the warm, safe lights of the cabin were in sight. They never told their grandparents what happened, but they never went near that creek again. And sometimes, even now as an adult, Ethan swears that when the wind is just right, he can hear his name, a perfect imitation carried on the breeze, a voice that belongs to him, but is attached to a face he prays he never sees. Story 3. The Man Who Wasn't My Father. This last story is maybe the most unsettling of all, because it deals with a face that was almost perfect. It comes to us from a woman named Maya, and it happened when she was just 10 years old. Her father was a traveling salesman, so he was often gone for a few days at a time. He was a creature of habit. He always called at 8 p.m. sharp when he was away, and he always parked his blue sedan in the exact same spot in their driveway. One evening, a full day earlier than they expected him, his car pulled up. Maya and her mother were thrilled, rushing to the door to greet him. He stepped out of the car, carrying his briefcase, smiling that same tired smile. Everything looked right. Same suit, same thinning hair, same warm eyes. But as he walked toward them, Maya felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Something was off. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. His walk was just a little too stiff, a little too deliberate. He came inside and hugged her mother, and then he hugged her. The embrace felt hollow, like someone performing the act of a hug. "Had a great trip," he said, his voice a perfect match to her father's. "Decided to come home early to surprise you." Her mother, just happy to have him home, didn't seem to notice anything. She bustled around, getting him a drink, asking about the trip. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling. She watched him from the kitchen doorway. He sat in his favorite armchair, but he didn't sink into it with a sigh of relief like her dad always did. He sat perfectly straight, like an actor on a stage. He talked about his clients. He told a funny story from the hotel, and it all sounded right, but it felt rehearsed. The face was her father's, but the person behind it felt like a total stranger. Later that night, the phone rang. Maya was in bed, and her mother answered it downstairs. She crept to the top of the stairs to listen. She heard her mother's confused voice. "What do you mean you're still in Albany?" "No, you're right here. You're sitting in the living room." "What are you talking about?" A wave of pure, absolute terror washed over Maya. She looked down the hall toward her parents' bedroom, where the man who looked like her father had gone to sleep. The door was slightly ajar. Then she heard her mother let out a small, terrified gasp. The line went dead. Slowly, the bedroom door creaked open. The man who wore her father's face stood in the doorway, bathed in shadow. He looked at her, and this time, the smile was gone. His face was a blank, emotionless mask. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching her. Folklore is filled with stories of doppelgängers, ghostly doubles that often appear as a harbinger of tragedy or death. Maya screamed, and that's the last thing she remembers clearly. Her real father drove up the next morning to find the house swarming with police cars, his wife in a state of shock, and his daughter unable to speak. The other man was gone. There was no sign of a break-in. Nothing was stolen. There was just an empty space where an imposter had been. To this day, Maya doesn't know what it was. A spirit, a doppelganger, something else. All she knows is that for one terrifying night, she lived in a house with a man who had her father's face, but had nothing human behind his eyes. The fear of the familiar being twisted into something monstrous is a terror that truly stays with you. If you've ever had an experience like these, a story about a face or a voice that just didn't belong, you want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments. We read all of them. And if you want to hear more true, unsettling stories, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. There's almost nothing more frightening than having your own reality turned against you. To look at a home you know is yours and have a stranger tell you it's theirs. Or to hear the voice of someone you love calling for you, knowing they're miles away. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us. Stay safe out there and be careful who or what you let in. 4 true horror stories of people replaced by themselves. Imagine for a second that the person living your life isn't you. A total stranger is using your name, spending your money, and sleeping in your bed tonight. Now, imagine the whole world believes them. They have your face, your records, your entire life story. You haven't just been robbed. You've been erased, replaced. This isn't the plot of a sci-fi movie. The doppelgangers in these stories aren't ghosts or demons. They're much scarier than that. They're bureaucratic mistakes, determined criminals, and glitches in the very systems we trust to protect us. These are the true horror stories of 4 people who are replaced by themselves. Section 1. The grandmother who wasn't herself. For 66-year-old Penny McCarthy, it all started on a perfectly normal afternoon in March 2024. She was out doing yard work at her home in Phoenix, Arizona, when several unmarked cars screeched to a stop, blocking her in. Men in plain clothes leaped out, pointing rifles right at her, yelling for her to get her hands up. Confused and absolutely terrified, Penny did what they said. Was this a robbery? A horrible prank? She asked the men if they could at least prove they were police, but they just screamed at her. "If you turn around again, you're gonna get tased," one of them warned. The world Penny knew fell apart in minutes. As they cuffed her, she begged them to tell her who they thought she was. They finally gave her a name she'd never heard before, Carol Rozek. They accused her of being a fugitive, wanted for a parole violation from 25 years ago. Penny pleaded with them, telling them they had the wrong person, that she was Penny McCarthy and could prove it in a heartbeat. They didn't listen. She wasn't fighting a person. She was fighting a piece of paper that refused to be wrong. They hauled her into custody, booking her not as herself, but as this other woman. They took her fingerprints, her DNA. They strip-searched her 3 separate times, an ordeal that dredged up terrible memories from her childhood. She spent the night totally alone in a cold federal detention cell, trapped in a reality that wasn't hers. The next day in court was even more surreal. She was presented to the judge as Carol Rozek. Her own family was right there in the courtroom, ready to scream that this was all a mistake, but it didn't seem to matter. A public defender explained the situation, but the judge just set an identity hearing for the following month. It took a full fingerprint and DNA comparison for the federal government to finally admit what Penny had been yelling all along. She was not Carol Rozek. The U.S. Marshal Service eventually acknowledged she was mistakenly arrested. But for Penny, the horror doesn't just go away. She's now suing the federal government, but she lives with a chilling fear. "I'm still afraid that one day I will be pulled over," she said, and again mistaken for a criminal. She was replaced by a ghost in a file, a nightmare created by a system that believed a 25-year-old photo over the living, breathing person standing right in front of them. Section 2. The man erased by his double back. In 1999, a woman was robbed in a Walmart parking lot in Kansas. The eyewitnesses were certain they knew who did it. Based on their testimony, a 25-year-old father of 2 named Richard Anthony Jones was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 19 years in prison. He swore he was innocent, but nobody believed him. As far as the state was concerned, the case was closed. Richard Jones, the criminal, was locked away. For years, Richard lived a life that wasn't his, serving time for a crime another man committed. The world moved on, but he was stuck in a story someone else wrote for him. The truth started to surface in the strangest of places, the prison itself. Other inmates would come up to him, telling him how much he looked like another prisoner, a guy named Ricky. At first, it was just a weird coincidence, but the resemblance was truly uncanny. His confrontation with his replacement wasn't face-to-face, but it was just as shocking. With help from the Midwest Innocence Project, Richard's lawyers tracked down his doppelganger, Ricky Lee Amos. The 2 men didn't just look nearly identical. They also had the same first name. And here's the kicker. Ricky had lived near the Walmart where the robbery happened. When investigators showed the original eyewitnesses a photo of Richard side by side with a photo of Ricky, the entire case fell apart. They couldn't be sure anymore. After 17 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Richard Anthony Jones was finally set free. His release was a strange mix of joy and deep, profound loss. He'd missed his daughters growing up. He'd lost almost 2 decades of his life because another man happened to have his face. And in a final bizarre twist, his doppelganger, Ricky Lee Amos, couldn't be charged for the robbery. The statute of limitations had run out. The state of Kansas did award Richard $1.1 million and a certificate of innocence. But how can money ever replace 17 stolen years? His life was overwritten by a chilling coincidence. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? That your entire identity, who you are in the eyes of the world, is actually that fragile. These stories prove that the life you know can be snatched away in an instant. If you find these real-life horror stories as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for more explorations into the unsettling and the unknown. And let us know in the comments, what's your biggest fear about identity theft? Section 3. The Stolen Life of Candida Gutierrez. Not every replacement happens with a SWAT team or a courtroom drama. Sometimes it's a quiet, slow-motion theft that goes on for years while you have no idea. That was the nightmare that happened to Candida Gutierrez, an elementary school teacher from Houston. For her, the other Candida wasn't a lookalike, but an invisible parasite building a parallel life using her name. The first hint that something was deeply wrong came when Candida's application for a mortgage was denied. The reason? The bank's records showed she already had a mortgage. That was the first thread she pulled, and it unraveled a whole tapestry of fraud, that had been wrapped around her life for years. An undocumented immigrant named Benita Cardona Gonzalez had gotten Candida's identity and was using it to live her own American dream. What she uncovered was staggering. Cardona Gonzalez had used Candida's good name to get a social security card, a driver's license, and even a Texas birth certificate. She'd gotten a job, bought a house, and received medical care for the birth of her children, all as Candida Gutierrez. Every official document the thief signed tangled the two lives together, slowly poisoning the real Candida's finances and reputation. She was being replaced by a phantom on paper. Her fight wasn't against a person she could see, but against a bureaucratic monster. For 12 long years, Candida fought to get her name back. Every time she tried to make a major life move, her ghostly double would pop up in the paperwork and block her. She was the victim of what's called total identity theft, where a criminal doesn't just steal your credit card number, they steal your entire existence. The fight finally ended when she faced her replacement, Benita Cardona Gonzalez, in a federal courtroom. Even with the victory, it was bittersweet. The thief was sentenced to 18 months in prison and then deportation. But for Candida, that was just the start of another battle, the painstaking process of correcting more than a decade of corrupted records. Her story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the person who replaces you does it one piece of paper at a time until you're the one left fighting to prove you're real. Section 4. The error that creates a ghost. Not all replacements are the work of criminals or doppelgängers. Sometimes the horror comes from something with no face at all. Bureaucracy. A simple clerical error, a typo in a database, can create a legal double that can haunt an innocent person for years. These are the stories of people who suddenly find themselves fighting a system that insists they're real, someone else, or that they don't exist at all. Take the case of a man in Bedfordshire whose normal life was shattered when police showed up at his door to arrest him. The charge? Failing to show up in court for an environmental health offense. The man, who had a perfectly clean record, was completely baffled. He was hauled away from his home in front of his neighbors, thrown in a cell overnight, and dragged to court the next day, all while trying to figure out what on earth was going on. The source of this nightmare wasn't some grand conspiracy. It was a simple IT glitch. A court warrant for another man with the same name, living in a different town, had been mistakenly linked to him in the system. As far as the police and the court were concerned, he was the man on the warrant. His protests meant nothing against the official record. He had been replaced by a digital ghost, a line of bad code that was now his reality. It was only because he frantically called the council that issued the original complaint that the mistake was finally discovered. In another case, a military veteran named Shaban Barrett, a man with zero criminal record, was arrested in Houston. Police suspected his legally owned handgun was illegal. A routine check spiraled into a nightmare when they confused him with a totally different person, convicted felon who sometimes used the alias James Barrett. Shaban was arrested and booked under the other man's real name. For over 6 weeks, he was trapped in jail, his identity completely overwritten by a stranger's criminal history. The entire system, the police, the prosecutors, even his own public defender failed to see the obvious mistake, leaving him to rot in a cell for a crime he didn't commit, under a name that wasn't his. For people who get caught in these bureaucratic nightmares, the aftermath is a long, exhausting fight to clear their names and fix their records. They are victims of a system that can, with a single keystroke, turn them into someone else. Their stories prove that sometimes the scariest monster is the one that lives inside a database, ready to steal your life without a second thought. Conclusion. From an armed raid in a quiet suburb to a real-life doppelganger, from a life stolen over a decade to a simple computer glitch, these stories show just how terrifyingly fragile our identities are. They prove that being replaced isn't just a fantasy. The real horror isn't just being mistaken for someone else. It's the lonely, maddening fight to convince the world that you are still you, long after the system has already decided you're gone. And that is a nightmare that could happen to any of us. 5 true terrifying road trip stories that ended in fear. There is a certain kind of vulnerability that creeps in when you re on the road late at night, isn't there? The world just shrinks down to the narrow tunnel of your headlights, and it feels like the normal rules of civilization start to fade away with the daylight. Then, out of nowhere, a blast of brilliant headlights floods your car, so bright it's completely blinding. Your partner, who's driving, lets out this raw, guttural scream and yanks the wheel, sending the car careening into a ditch. You brace for the collision you know is coming, but it never does. No taillights shrinking into the distance, no rumble of a diesel engine. It was just gone. The boyfriend, pale and shaking, was absolutely certain. A massive semi-truck had been barreling straight for them, taking up both lanes. He said he had no choice but to swerve, or they would have been killed. While his girlfriend only remembered the disorienting flood of headlights, the image of that phantom truck was burned into his mind. Sightings of phantom vehicles, especially trucks, are a surprisingly common theme in roadside folklore. You've got the infamous Route 666, nicknamed the Devil's Highway, where a spectral semi is said to run drivers off the road, and countless other local legends. The fear of what or who could be hiding just out of sight is a primal one, as a solo traveler found out one night at a deserted gas station. For this couple, though, it wasn't a legend. It was a near-death experience that left them with a permanent fear of what else might be haunting the lonely roads after dark. Did someone hide in his trunk while he was inside paying for gas? We all know the urban legend of the killer in the backseat. A warning to always check your car before you get in. But a killer in the trunk? The idea was just as horrifying. It wasn't a polite knock, but a persistent, forceful banging. He crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A disheveled, wild-eyed man was on the other side, jiggling the handle and throwing his shoulder against the door, trying to break it down. Panic set in. The traveler backed away, his mind racing. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking too much to dial 911 right away. The man outside was getting more aggressive, his muttering escalating into angry shouts. Every mile marker he passed heightened the knot of fear in his stomach. A squad car had pulled into the motel parking lot. The light, they say, is his lantern as his spirit searches the dark woods for his missing head for all eternity. Other stories talk about lost Spanish conquistador treasure, the restless souls of murdered railroad workers, or the ghost of a groom endlessly searching for his bride who vanished into the thicket. While scientists might try to explain it away as swamp gas or reflections from distant car headlights, those who have seen the light firsthand, who have felt the chilling isolation of Bragg Road at night, aren't so easily convinced. The Saratoga light remains an enduring and terrifying mystery, a final, chilling reminder that when you take to the back roads of the world, you can never be entirely sure what's waiting for you in the darkness ahead. The sudden arrival of the police startled the man, and he bolted into the darkness. What's the scariest thing you've ever experienced on a road trip? Share your own true stories in the comments below. And if you want to hear more terrifying tales that will make you think twice about your next journey, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The police, who had been alerted by another guest, caught the suspect a short time later. They discovered he was intoxicated and carrying drugs. The traveler was left completely shaken, the reality of how close he'd come to a violent, unpredictable attack hitting him with full force. It's a chilling reminder that when you're on the road, the dangers don't always stay outside your door. The tapping was persistent, a constant reminder that he might not be alone. He pictured pulling over on the dark, empty highway, the potential confrontation playing out in a dozen horrible ways in his head. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and pulled into the bright, safe parking lot of the next town's police station. With his heart pounding, he opened the trunk. It was empty. The railroad tracks that used to be here were pulled up way back in 1934, but they left something behind. A legend. It shows up at random. A floating, pumpkin-sized globe that can change color from white to blue, yellow, or even green. Witnesses say it bobs and weaves down the old railroad path, sometimes looking like it's dancing playfully in the distance, other times rushing towards cars with terrifying speed before just winking out of existence. The locals call it the Saratoga Light, or more appropriately, the Ghost Light. There was no sign of anyone, no object that could have possibly made that sound. But the deep, unsettling feeling of being watched, of having been in the presence of some unseen danger, stuck with him for the rest of his trip and made him swear off traveling alone at night for good. After filling up and grabbing a coffee, he got back on the highway with the long, lonely road stretching out ahead. That's when he heard it for the first time. A faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the back of his car. At first, he brushed it off as a loose item in his trunk, maybe a piece of luggage shifting around. But the sound didn't stop. It got louder, more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Your heart is hammering against your ribs as you look back at the road, only to see nothing. The road is utterly empty. No truck, no headlights, not even a sound. U.S. Route 44 in Rehoboth, Massachusetts is one of those places, known for a spirit that has been terrifying drivers for decades. A roadside motel, which should be a haven for a tired traveler, can just as easily turn into a trap. For one man on a long road trip, a much-needed overnight stop almost became his last. Exhausted after a full day on the road, he checked into the first motel he saw, a generic-looking building with a flickering vacancy sign. He locked the door, slid the chain across, and fell into a deep sleep. A driver, usually alone, is making their way down the stretch of Route 44 near the Seekonk-Rehoboth line when they see a man on the side of the road. His description is incredibly consistent. A tall, well-built man with red hair and often a beard, wearing a red flannel shirt and work pants or jeans. He's got his thumb out, a classic hitchhiker. Kind-hearted or maybe just curious drivers pull over. The man will only ever get into the back seat, even if the passenger seat is wide open. He never says a word, just gestures down the road when they ask where he's headed. The locals all know him as the red-headed hitchhiker. There is just a chilling silence and the question that hangs in the air. What in the world did you just see? This isn't some scene from a movie. It is a real experience that left a couple forever questioning the line between our world and whatever lies beyond it. A quiet chuckle from the backseat. The giggle grows into a full-blown, maniacal laugh that echoes through the car. Just as the terrified driver threatens to pull over, they glance in the rearview mirror and see that the back seat is empty. The hitchhiker is gone, vanished from a moving car, but his presence sticks around. Some people have reported hearing his crazed laughter coming through the car radio, even when it's turned off. One woman even claimed he taunted her by name. The first published account of this legend dates back to 1994, but local stories have been floating around for much longer, cementing the red-headed hitchhiker as a truly terrifying fixture of Bristol County folklore. Every flickering shadow, every pair of headlights that pops up in your rearview mirror feels like it could be a threat. For most of us, these are just passing worry tricks of a tired mind. But for some people, the darkness on these lonely stretches of highway is hiding something genuinely terrifying. These are the stories of those who kept driving, only to find their trip was taking a sharp turn into horror. Imagine you're cruising down a deserted country road. It's late, you're exhausted, and all you can think about is finally getting home. Section 1. The ghost truck on a country road for one couple driving home from a wedding. That exact scenario became a terrifying reality. The drive had been pretty boring. the conversation slowly dying as the late hour settled over them. They were on a back road they knew well, a shortcut they'd taken dozens of times. The boyfriend was at the wheel, his eyes fixed on the asphalt rolling out in front of them. All of a sudden, he screamed, raw, pure sound of panic, and swerved the car violently off the road, the tires digging into the soft dirt of the shoulder. The girlfriend, jolted from a light doze, raced for the impact of a massive truck she now saw in a blinding flash of light. But there was no screech of metal, no shattering of glass, just the sudden, dead silence of their stalled engine. When they looked back, the road was completely empty. Section 2. The red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44. Some roads are just plain infamous. Their legends get whispered from one generation to the next, becoming a part of the local identity. The stories almost always start the same. The drive continues in an unnerving silence. And then it starts. Section 3. The stranger in the trunk. Not all road trip horrors come from beyond the grave. Sometimes the scariest threats are very, very real. He was running on fumes, the needle teasing the red line as he pulled into a dimly lit, eerily silent station. A cold, sharp paranoia started to set in. His mind raced. Section 4. The arrest at the motel. Sometimes the destination is no safer than the road itself. He was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a noise at his door. Just as the traveler thought the flimsy door was about to give way, the red and blue flash of police lights swept across the room. The open road is full of mysteries, and as these stories prove, not all of them are friendly. Conclusion. The Saratoga Ghost Light on Bragg Road. Our final story takes us to the heart of the Big Thicket in southeast Texas, to an 8-mile stretch of dirt road called Bragg Road. For over 100 years, people traveling on this isolated road have reported seeing a mysterious orb of light. Countless legends try to explain the light. The most popular one tells of a railroad brakeman who was tragically decapitated in an accident on the line.